All right, welcome everyone. Start have people jump into the chat here, and we'll just give everyone a couple minutes to cycle through. We'll start in the next couple minutes, but we're excited for everyone to join this webinar brought to you by Patent 355 and Bionic Collabs. Um, Please drop your name, info, LinkedIn into the chat so you can connect with others. We'll be creating a recording of this event and sending it out to everyone with some notes and follow-ups as well. So you have all the relevant information. We are going to be using the Q&A session, so please drop your questions into there. I'll be moderating it as Nate jumps into his incredible chat and popping in questions where we're relevant. Feel free to ask whenever. But again, please use the Q&A so we can monitor the questions coming in and not the chat. We'll give it another minute or two as people start to come in. I'm excited to get this show on the road. And Tony, yes, we will have a of this, and we'll share it directly via email with everybody as well as on our blog. All right. I'll kick us off here. Again, you have Nate and my LinkedIn in the chat right now. Hopefully everyone can see that. Please drop your LinkedIn in there if you'd like to connect to others that are on this conversation, which is going to be great. We will also share a link to Nate's book. Just so you have reference on it. I think everyone should have seen that. But we will send out a digital free copy to everyone that joined the chat and registered. Decoding the Why. It's an incredible read. I'm excited for everyone to get access to that and be able to build off of what Nate has talked about here. I'm going to give a quick intro about Bionic and then jump into an intro on Nate, and we're going to jump right into the session for everybody. So again, this is our fifth webinar or community chat with Bionic Collabs. This time we're being joined by Nate from Patent 355. Every chat that we have is really dedicated to early stage founders, builders, operators, and growers to really help provide expert-led information and discussions to improve your game and ultimately help improve your odds of success and become more successful. As a growth marketer and someone that's been a chief marketing officer, chief product officer, today what we're going to be talking about is truly important to be able to drive into the behavioral psychology and science behind why people convert, funnels, optimizations. Sometimes these things are really not looked at as sexy and things that people want to pay attention to because so much is focused on the top of funnel. But what Nate focuses on is being able to find who your right customers are and then optimize your conversion funnel path with them, which ultimately leads to better customer acquisition costs and faster growth. So I'm going to learn a lot here too. So I'm really excited to jump in. A little bit more about Bionic. We're a collaborative that brings the startup community together. We're founders, operators, builders, and we have our partners like Nate who are in orbit that help our founders and operators level up. We're a collective focused on building more durable companies with sustainable and scalable growth to reach product market fit faster. So we really are focused on the pre-seed to seed and getting you to A. So we're excited to meet all the founders and builders that are here and collaborate with you ongoing. About me, my name is Justin Cohen again. For those that don't know me, I've been in the startup ecosystem for 20 plus years at the earliest stage, building marketing and product functions, scaling two companies to exit over $1 billion at Enova and Pangea. An active angel investor with 15 companies in my portfolio, two unicorns and one that's exited as well. And I'm most excited about the early stage of building and scaling. As mentioned, we're going to be recording this session and we'll send this out to everybody. Again, you'll get a free copy to Nate's digital book, Decoding the Why. And please, again, pop your questions into the Q&A section and I'll put questions that you like, and we'll be answering questions throughout the chat. So quickly, intro on Nate. So Nate Androsky is an entrepreneur who uses behavioral science and human-centered design to help early-stage companies ideate, validate, and accelerate product market fit at Patent 355, which I just learned is homage to his grandfather. who has nearly 100 patents that he's filed, and some of them are sitting behind Nate right now, which is just super cool. And 355 was the last patent that his grandfather filed. Um, and he believes the key to unlocking the potential of technology lies within our understanding of the psychological factors that drive human decision making. By combining scientific findings with outside the box thinking, he helps turn the human understanding into business advantages. He's also author of the Amazon bestseller, Decoding the Why, how behavioral science is driving the next generation of product design, and a frequent international speaker. And again, everyone's going to get access to that digital copy, which is awesome. He's been featured in Forbes, Inc. magazine, and Huffington Post. Has earned accolades from Fast Company for his work. Prior to Patent 355, he co-founded and led a digital agency, which in 2022 was named as one of the 5,000 fastest growing private companies in the U.S. by Inc. magazine. He enjoys working on hard problems with smart people and resides in Washington, D.C. with his wife. A few houseplants he's managed to keep alive. So Nate, I'm going to kick it over to you and excited to sit back and learn.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. I am beyond excited to be here today. I love giving this presentation and talking about behavioral science. So ask me any questions as I go through the presentation. I'm going to go ahead and just share my screen here because I do have some slides. Desktop one. Awesome. So we're good to go. Again, feel free to jump in at any time and ask any questions as I go through the presentation. Justin is going to be monitoring the chat, so if anything pops up, he'll take a look at the chat and jump in and ask questions, but you can also feel free to chime in. So as Justin mentioned, my name is Nate Endorsky. Behavioral science and product design and marketing is something that I'm very passionate about, and I also hold a belief that the next product revolution will be psychological. Often when we're building early stage companies and we're thinking about the products that we're building and how to bring them to market, we're often asking ourselves, how can we make something faster, more sophisticated, more technologically advanced? And too often it is my belief that we overlook or don't look deep enough into the psychological aspect of how our users engage with our products. And this is a massive, often overlooked opportunity. And I've been working in the space for over a decade now. And it was surprising, and it's still surprising to me, how few companies actually look at the psychological side of what it looks like to bring products to market. And that's what we're going to dig in deep today and explore. And if you think about building digital experiences, whether it's a mobile app or a web app or any type of experience that lives online, at the core, these digital experiences are really human experiences. And if we don't first really understand the human experience, we can build the most technically sophisticated product that the world's ever seen, but it's going to fall short because it doesn't actually change the behavior or drive the behavior that we want. And that's why it's critical to understand the human experience before we layer on the digital experience. So I start my presentation with this question here of, which table is larger? Is it the one on the left or the one on the right? If you haven't seen this before, you might guess that it's an optical illusion, because why else would I present two tables on a screen if it wasn't? If you have seen this before, you probably know it's an optical illusion. Both tables are actually exactly the same length. And it's just the orientation of the table on the page that makes it look like it's actually different. And the same way that our brain processes visual information, that things can appear to be different based on how they're placed in space and what they're placed next to. The same works in the way that we process information. And that's what we're going to dig into a lot today. And what's amazing is 95% of our thoughts, emotions, and learnings actually occur before we're even aware of it. So as we walk through the world, we're taking in massive amounts of information without consciously being aware of it. And we're making decisions based on this information. And that's a lot of what behavioral science digs into. It seeks to understand what type of information that we're not consciously aware of is impacting the way that we're making decisions. And the best way to think about this is just recall the last time that you walked into a grocery store. We like to think that we're in complete control of our decisions, but ultimately we're not. And walking into a grocery store and deciding, for example, what bag of cookies or what box of cookies you want to buy is a prime example of this. We like to think that we're in full control of what box of cookies we want to buy, but ultimately where the cookie is placed on the shelf, what it's placed next to, the price point of the box of cookie can all influence what decisions that we're going to make. And not only that, there's also this idea in behavioral science of priming, where experiences before we even walked into the store, who we spoke to, what we spoke to them about, what we experienced even days before can impact decisions that we're making at that point in time. And this is a really important concept to drive home. And what's amazing about the way that our brains work is we can do really sophisticated types of activities without even thinking twice about it. So maybe think back to the last time that you drove a car. You're going down the highway 65 miles per hour. You might be turning up and down the radio. Hopefully, you're not on the phone. You're talking to somebody next to you, and you're doing all of this on autopilot. I can't tell you how many times in high school I drove to class, but I can't actually recall a specific time of driving to class because it just runs on autopilot. But sometimes there's really seamlessly simple tasks that we have a hard time doing. Recall the last time that you couldn't find where your keys were. And what's fascinating is we can do these really complex tasks without even thinking about it, but sometimes very simple tasks we have a hard time completing. And why does this happen? Well, that's a lot of what behavioral science digs into. Behavioral science, and you might have also heard of behavioral economics. For purposes of today's talk, we're just going to say they're more or less the same thing. They are not exactly the same thing, but we can get into a conversation about that later. But anytime that you hear me refer to the work that we're doing as behavioral science, it also can be somewhat interchanged with behavioral economics. And one of the foundational theories of behavioral science is that our brain typically operates in one of two modes. So the first mode is known as the automatic, the system one thinking. The second mode is known as reflective, the system two thinking. And automatic system one thinking is self-explanatory. It's the type of mode that happens without us even consciously thinking about it. So walking through the world, it scans the environment. It's very fast, but it tends to be error prone and it runs more or less on autopilot. So if you walked into the room and I threw a tennis ball at your head, you're going to do one of two things. You're either going to put your hand up and try to catch that tennis ball, or you're going to duck. And you do all of that without consciously thinking about it. You're just running on autopilot. That's system one thinking. Reflective is system two. It's pretty analytical, but it requires a lot of effort. It requires a lot of brain power. And we use it for very specific problems. So think about the last time you were creating a strategy for your company. This would fall into system two thinking. And it tends to be very, very slow, but it's actually quite reliable. And oftentimes what happens is certain tasks or certain habits start in system two, and over time they move into system one. And one of the reasons that this happens is because we wouldn't be able to operate every single day if some actions didn't run on autopilot. So think about, you probably don't remember, but when you were a little kid, learning to walk, how much effort you have to put into trying to figure out how to walk. But over time, this becomes habitual, and now you can walk without even thinking about it. I played piano as a kid growing up, and this is a prime example, musical instruments, of something that starts in system two and over time works its way over into system one. When you first start to learn a piece, you're pecking at the keys, you're making loud sounds, nothing is in rhythm, but over time it moves over to system one to the point where you can play that piece on the piano without even thinking about it. And when we think about building products and bringing them to market, oftentimes we focus on what it is that we can see on a screen, right? The user experience or the user interface design of the product or the marketing strategy that we're creating. And that's the tip of the iceberg. But underneath that, there is so much more going on. And that is the question of what drives human behavior. Because design strategies, marketing strategies really should be a byproduct of what drives human behavior, not the other way around. Oftentimes when we build these strategies, what we do is we go look at our competitors or examples that exist on the web, and we see something that we like. We say, oh, that's cool, that's interesting, that's neat. Let's go ahead and build that without really understanding what is the behavior that we want to drive and how do we want to drive that behavior. And what we're going to talk about today is really understanding what are the behaviors that we want to drive, how do we drive those behaviors, and then how do those behaviors show up in a feature set. And this is critical because what it's going to do is it's going to give you information that's going to increase the likelihood that whatever it is that you build or whatever it is that you market is going to have a higher chance of moving the needle forward. And there's a famous quote by Henry Ford, although I posted this on LinkedIn about a year or so ago, and somebody came at me and told me that he never said it. So I don't have proof that he did or did not say this, but I think it's important because it's a really interesting thought experiment is if I had asked people what they wanted, they would have said faster horses. And when it comes to behavioral science specifically, this is a key insight. When you do customer research and you do user research, I'm sure that you found this, that people tell you they want something and then you build it and they don't use it in the way that you thought they would. And part of the reason that this happens is because we're really bad at explaining why we do the things that we do. And oftentimes when we don't know why we did something, we just make up reasons. And it's not malicious, but it's just the way that we work. And then what we do as product builders and product designers and product marketers is we say, okay, well, if I just give people the information that they need, they'll change their behavior, right? If I want them to spend less money, I just need to show them how much money they're spending every single week, and they'll spend less money. The problem is access to information isn't a stage gate to behavior change. It is a great first step to make people aware of the information, the data that they need, but oftentimes it doesn't move the needle, right? We all know the speed limit when we're driving down the highway, but how many times do many of us speed when we're driving our car? And one of the frameworks that I like to think about doing user research and building products and bringing them to market is in a framework of say, do I. And Jonathan Haidt came up with this analogy, what we call the elephant in the writer. And what he said is, when you collect say data, which is your qualitative information, user interviews, surveys, basically asking people to explain either why they did something or why they will do something in the future. This is referred to as the say data. And that is the person on top of the elephant, right? That person is trying to explain why it is that the elephant's going where the elephant is going. The do data is the quant side. That's the analytics that you're seeing. If you have full story or hotjar or some sort of analytic or tracking tool on your product, this is what people are actually doing. And that is represented by the elephant. But the elephant has a mind of its own. The writer tries to sit on top of the elephant, explain why the elephant is doing what the elephant is doing, but ultimately the writer doesn't really know. And the third piece here, which I have layered in, building on top of Jonathan Haidt's analogy of the elephant and the writer, is what I call the why data. And that is the behavioral science. And that does two key things. The first thing it does is it explains the difference between the say and the do data. Why are our users or our customers telling us that they're doing one thing, but they're doing something completely different? And it also helps us to understand what are the factors that are driving their behavior that they can't even articulate themselves. And it gives us a brand new playbook to work from coming up with product ideas and feature ideas and marketing strategies. And we're going to get into the nitty gritty of how all of that fits together today during our presentation. And we're going to focus on 4 key areas. There's a lot more than just these 4 key areas, but just to get the ball started, we're going to talk about time, how we view time, our perception of time, incentives, both external, extrinsic incentives and intrinsic incentives, context, how experiences show up and how that impacts how we make decisions, and the framing of certain decisions and how that impacts how we make decisions. And what we'll start about today is we'll get into a lot of the academic research and some of the theory behind this, and then we'll actually peel back into actual product examples so you can see how these examples come to life. And one interesting concept, if you're building some type of product or solution that is trying to help people meet their future self, right? Change their long-term behavior or engagement, whether it's save more money or eat healthier or exercise more. There's a really interesting concept in behavioral science around this idea of the future self. And what we often see as behavioral scientists is that there's this intention action gap, right? So we want to do better, we want to take an action, but we often find ourselves not following through on that action. So New Year's rolls around and you say, hey, listen, I'm going to go to the gym this year, I'm going to work out, I'm going to get fit, and I'm going to get strong. But then what we see is about 45 days or so into the new year, it's something like 70 to 75% of these declarations actually fall through. And we find ourselves just sitting on the couch. And why does this happen? Why is there this intention and action gap? It's not that we don't want to do better, but we often find ourselves not following through on the intention that we have. And when we think about driving behavior, there's 3 key components about how habits are built. And Nir Eyal wrote a book about this called Hooked, which came out, I think, like 10 or 15 years ago, that digs into this concept. But think about when you woke up this morning and you decided to brush your teeth. Okay, there's a trigger, right? Usually when you wake up in the morning, you have that bad taste in your mouth. The second piece of a habit loop is the action. So you take the action. So this morning you woke up, there's bad taste in your mouth, you take your toothbrush, and then you brush your teeth. And then the third piece of a habit loop is the reward. There's some type of satisfaction that you get from taking this behavior. Very interesting tidbit. Crest, when it was originally created, didn't have that minty, fresh feeling, and they couldn't get people to engage in the daily behavior of actually using their toothpaste. Once they introduced the minty, fresh, tingling feeling, all of a sudden they saw that people started to use the toothpaste every single day. And this is a prime example of how, if there's not a reward around the habit loop breaks down. And these are three key components. And oftentimes, if you're not seeing the engagement that you want from your users, it can trace back to this in some capacity. Now, if the action that they take and there's a clear trigger and reward, you're kind of like set to go, but most times there isn't. So the question then becomes, what happens when that reward isn't prominent, right? So for example, getting people to save more money is a prime example of this. The reward for saving more money, especially if you're saving for retirement, theoretically, isn't until the far off distant future. So what we're going to look at today is what behavioral scientists often refer to as reward substitution, and how do you fix this problem? Before we get into that, I do want to talk a little bit about this idea of present bias. Us as humans, we're very wired to want to take an action, and then when we want to see the payout of the action right away. And there's a couple different reasons that we want to see the payout of this, is because when it happens right away, it's very concrete, and the perceived value is quite high. Anytime that reward is pushed into the future, it becomes more abstract, and the perceived value actually decreases. So if I asked you to run a mile today, and I said, hey, listen, I'm going to give you $100 today if you run that mile, it's concrete, it has a high perceived value. But if I said, listen, if you run a mile today, I'm going to give you $100 in 6 months, all of a sudden that $100 becomes more abstract. And even though the dollar amount is exactly the same, the perceived value actually decreases. So what happens when the reward is far off in the distant future? Well, one of the strategies can be is, how do we take that reward and how do we make it feel more present? The way that we conceptualize our future self is also fascinating as it relates to present bias. When we think about ourselves today, we often think about ourselves in first person. But when we think about our future self, we think about ourselves in third person. The orientation actually changes. And why is this important? When we think about ourselves in third person, we conceptualize ourselves as a stranger. Somebody walking down the street who hasn't saved money for retirement is no different than us thinking about ourselves at 65, not saving for retirement. Sure, we say that we care about our future self, but that future self is very distant from us. It's like a stranger, so we have a hard time connecting the two. So one of the strategies to offset this is to bring that third person closer to our current self. Now, the question is, like, how does this actually show up in some sort of product design or product marketing experience? I just talked a lot about some really interesting behavioral science, and it's a lot of academic jargon. And the question then becomes, well, how does this actually roll up into a product experience? So what you're looking at right now is a typical flow that you probably see for some type of consumer-facing product that was trying to get people to save money for retirement, right? You sign up for the app, you probably define your retirement goals, you put in how much you earn, how much you want to save, when do you think you're going to retire? And if you went and you interviewed customers about this, they would probably give you feedback on the actual flow and maybe give you some interesting ideas of how you can change it. But if you looked into the behavioral science of actually what drives saving behavior, and you took this idea of the future self and you integrated it into the way that you bring these product experiences to life, it's going to completely reorient how you think about this experience. And let me show you. So what you could do integrating this idea of the future self is you could have the individual take a photo or upload a photo of what they look like today. And then you could use some sort of AI related technology to show what you would look like in the future. Again, we're closing that gap between the current self and the future self. And this was actually a study that was done by AARP. They actually showed a subsegment of people asking them to save for retirement, what they would look like when they were 65. And they saw that the individuals that were shown a version of their future self, they're willing to put away roughly doubled for retirement, right? And I love this example because it's a prime example of an insight that you're never going to get from customer research. No customer, unless they're a behavioral scientist, is going to be saying to you, hey, what if you showed me a version of my future self and I would save more money for retirement. And this is where the wide data comes into play. So the other alternative when you're trying to get somebody to engage in a behavior, and this is true for B2B products just as much as it is true for B2C products, is how do you bring that reward closer? And there's a concept which is known as reward substitution. And this is where a lot of incentives and strategies around what I would refer to as gamification come into play, but they aren't very well understood. And that's what we're going to dig in today. So what we're going to talk about is what is gamification? How does it come to light? Or what are the key components of it? So when you're thinking about giving somebody a reward, there are two types of rewards that it breaks down into. There are intrinsic, and then there are extrinsic rewards. Extrinsic rewards are typically rewards that you get some sort of external reward for completing. So, for example, WW, which helps people live healthier lives, they have a program called Wellness Wins. This is a pretty prime example of using extrinsic motivators to get somebody to take an action. What you do is by engaging their platform and doing the behaviors that you're supposed to do, you get these reward points, and then you can trade those points in for certain perks and benefits. And this is very common in health and wellness apps, financial apps, is you give somebody points and badges, some type of reward for engaging in some type of behavior. And extrinsic rewards do work well, but they only work well in certain contexts. So the first one is the action needs to be easy and straightforward. So if I told you that I'm going to give you a $20 gift card for being healthier, that's not going to work very well. If I told you that I'm going to give you a $20 gift card if you go and change a light bulb in your house to become more climate conscientious, that actually might work well. The action is very easy and it's relatively straightforward. It also works well for a short-term motivator for a very specific purposes. One of the reasons that extrinsic rewards don't work well over the long term is something known as hedonic adaptation. We get used to the reward, and then we need a bigger reward to keep up the same behavior. The third piece is the reward is relatively immediate. Back to that example that I gave you about running a mile and then giving you the $100. You need to give the reward as soon as possible after the behavior is actually taken. And then the fourth one is the outcome needs to be very concrete, right? You're asking somebody to take an action to achieve some outcome, and that outcome needs to be concrete, right? It can't just be feel better, live better, operate better. You need to give them a concrete outcome. And I'm not going to go too deep into extrinsic reward today because there's a lot out there on that. But what I do want to dig into is the other side of the coin, which is so often overlooked, which is intrinsic motivation. And these are the types of actions or behaviors that we engage in because we get some sort of self-satisfaction from engaging in that behavior. I would imagine most of you here, if you're building a company, for example, the money's nice, but oftentimes if you're an entrepreneur, like a lifelong entrepreneur, you engage in these behaviors because you get some sort of self-satisfaction from it. And a lot of this ties back to something known as self-determination theory. And self-determination theory shows up in three key components, and it talks a lot about why we engage in intrinsic motivation. The first one is belongingness. Are you surrounded by people who are like me, right? So Justin's building a community. This is a prime example. Are you surrounded by people who think and operate in a way that you also think and operate? The second one is competence. Am I good at this? Am I engaging in a behavior and an action, and am I making progress, right? If you constantly are doing something and you never feel that you're getting better at it, you become demotivated really, really quickly. It's really important to show progress early and often, and to show your users that they're actually progressing through their journey. And then the third piece is autonomy. Do I have some sort of control over the outcome? And when we think about intrinsic motivation, these are three key pillars to think about intrinsic motivation through. And Noom actually does a really fascinating job of this. If you've ever been through their onboarding process, they actually trigger intrinsic motivation, but they do it through framing questions in an interesting way. So what you'll notice here is they ask you, what is your main reason for wanting to lose weight? Become healthier, feel better day to day. And those are both focused on intrinsic motivations. There's personal reasons that you want to engage in these behaviors. And Questions in this way are a great way to prompt or to boil up intrinsic motivation by framing these questions almost in a leading way to get people to reflect on their intrinsic motivation for engaging in behavior. WW, which was an example I used earlier, has this program where you get a certain amount of points per day that you can use however you want. And what's interesting about this is on the surface, it looks like a gamification technique, but it's actually not. It's actually an intrinsic motivation technique. It ties back to that idea of autonomy, right? Do I have control over my day? Do I have control over the outcome? Do I have control over what it is that I want to eat, right? Rather than restricting what you can eat, what they've told you is you have a certain number of points and you have complete control to allocate those points however it is that you want to. That's one reason that they did this. The other reason is also because trying to account for foods that are good or bad for you is really complicated. So using this system of points simplifies that entire mental model. This is also another fascinating example. The name of the company is called Gradecraft. It's actually mentioned in my book. There's a professor at University of Michigan, and he kind of reimagined the way that students in his class would earn grades. And he said to them, hey, listen, the way that you get an A in my class is every single assignment, every single test has a point value. And at the end of the course, you have to earn a certain number of points to get an A. And the brilliance behind this is because what happens is nobody feels that they're ever out of the game. I had courses in college where there was 3 tests, for example, and if I didn't do well on one of the exams, I would give up. Not completely, but I would say like, there's no way I'm going to be able to get an A in this class. So there's no point in continuing to try and put effort in. And he completely flipped that on its head. This way, students never feel that they're actually out of the game because if they do poorly on one assignment, they can start to map out how they can accrue enough points on other assignments to still get an A. And again, this is another prime example because you look at this and you would think if you didn't understand the behavioral science behind it, that it's a gamification technique, and it's actually not. The core concept in here is building around that intrinsic motivation, right? Giving people control and autonomy over the outcome to get the grade that they want in their class. So how do you prompt intrinsic motivation, right? Extrinsic motivation is relatively easy or straightforward to theoretically prompt. Like you're giving somebody something for doing something, but intrinsic lives inside of you. There was a really interesting study where they actually took high school mentors and high school students, and they asked the mentors to give the high school students advice. And one of the things that they found was the individuals giving the advice, the intrinsic motivation to do well in school increased. And this is actually a little bit obvious once you learn about it. Because how many times have you given other people advice and then you think to yourself, I should take the own advice that I'm giving everybody else? And you also may be thinking, well, if intrinsic motivation works well and extrinsic motivation works well, can I combine them? And the answer is you actually can't. But before we get into that, I just want to review really quickly what makes intrinsic motivation effective. So it provides some sort of inherent satisfaction for engaging in the behavior. The second thing it does is it provides people a sense of autonomy, right? They have control over the outcome. It provides them a need for mastery and competence to know that they're getting better at something and they're working their way through it, and a desire to belong with other people that are also engaging in that behavior. Now, if you think that intrinsic motivation can work well and extrinsic motivation can work well, can't you just combine the two? And the answer is, unfortunately, you can't. There is a very real known effect, what is known as crowding out, that we have seen come up again and again. And for those of you who are old enough here, which I am, you might remember something called Encarta, which basically was the competitor to Wikipedia that came out. Microsoft spent millions and millions of dollars hiring writers to create articles, which was one of the first online encyclopedias. And as you know, today, Wikipedia, people do it completely for free, and Wikipedia is a thriving organization. And Encarta, I don't know if it exists anymore, but if it does, no one knows about it. And this is a prime example of a behavior that was intrinsically motivated, and somebody came in and tried to introduce an extrinsic reward, and it completely backfired. And there's a lot of studies on this. There's an experiment that was done where children were rewarded for drawing with felt tip pens. It was an activity that they really genuinely enjoyed doing. and they started to give these kids rewards for doing so. And when they started to introduce these rewards for drawing with these felt tip pens, the kids who had previously shown interest in doing this activity no longer showed it anymore. You hear a lot about this, like with musicians, right? I love to play music, I love to perform, and then I became famous and made a lot of money, and the motivation to do so subsided quite a bit. So we're going to get now into this idea of born to follow. So we just talked about kind of how rewards play into a digital experience. And now we're going to dig into what other people who are like us or who are not like us around us are doing and how that impacts the way that we make decisions. When I was a kid, my mother used to say, when I wanted to do something, if all your friends jumped off a bridge, would you? And my response to that was often, well, I think I probably would, right? Because if everybody else is jumping off a bridge, it must mean that A, the bridge isn't too high, or there's a soft spot to land below the bridge. And this is a very real phenomenon. We take a lot of cues from what people are doing around us to inform what it is that we should do. So Robert Cialdini did an experiment years and years ago during one of the California blackouts. They were attempting to get people to save energy. And they went around to houses and they put these little door hangers on. And one version of the door hanger gave people practical reasons for wanting to save energy. You can save money, you can protect the environment, you can help future generations, and they gave them strategies to save. The other one used social norms. It just referenced a percent of their neighbors that were using fans instead of AC. They ran the experiment. What they found, the doors that had the door hanger, which gave people rational reasons to save energy, there was no decrease in energy usage. The one that leveraged social norms, they saw a 6% decrease, which is fascinating, right? Because this comes back to the example that, well, if I just give people information and I give them the rational reasons as to why they should do something, they'll take action. And that's not the case, as you can see here. People were taking cues from what their neighbors were doing to inform how they should behave. And it's not only using the theory, but also how the theories actually show up in these examples that can make or break the experience. So again, this was another example of using social comparisons and social norms in a savings app. And these are three different ways to show this and how it can show up, right? So what the creator was attempting to do was to say, hey, listen, this is how much money you're spending. This is how much money people like you are spending, right? And you can see these interfaces are very graphical. They have a lot of information, a lot of data. And they tested all three of these. And they saw that it had actually no impact on people's savings behaviors. Finally, they tested this one. They asked people, how much do you expect to spend on a certain category next month? And then what they would do is they would say, these are most people like you, and this is how much you spend. And they would show the separation between the two groups. And users given this condition spent about $17 less in the following week than the control group. So it's not only about the theory per se, but it's also about how that theory shows up in the experience is really important, because this example has the theory in different concepts and different ideas, but you can see in just one of these concepts and one of these ideas, did it actually move the needle? This is also another fascinating example of using social norms. There was a company called Talented, and what they were trying to do is they were training employees to learn new skills. And the basic idea was the employee would learn a new skill and they were supposed to take a video or a photo of them putting the skill into practice. And they found a lot of people were consuming the content, but no one was actually putting the skill into practice. And they tried all of these different things. They tried gamifying the experience, it didn't work. They tried giving people gift cards to take a video of them putting the new skill into work, and didn't work. And what they finally realized was that they needed to change the context of the environment to get people to engage in this behavior. And what they did was when people registered for the app, they would break them up into cohorts of about 10 people. And sure enough, there was always like one or two people who were off to a really fast start. And they would send a simple message to the rest of the cohort. They would say, congrats to, John and Sarah, you're off to a fast start. Keep up the good work. And all of a sudden, when they sent that message, they saw an uptick in engagement from the other people in the cohort. Because what was happening was the other people in the cohort were going, oh my God, there's already two people who are like off to a quick start. I'm behind. And I remember in college, I used to do this a lot. There'd be a test coming up, and the date of the test didn't actually matter. I would ask my friends if they started studying. And if everyone had started studying, I felt that I was behind. But if no one had started studying, I felt that I wasn't behind. I was using others in my cohort, in my group, to make a judgment call whether I'm progressing correctly. And that's the same thing that's going to here. And you can see how it impacts people's behavior. This is also a really interesting use of social norms and similarity bias in Airbnb. So everyone here, I'm sure, knows Airbnb. It's a thriving platform today. Early on, though, they had a problem. There was no reviews on the platform, right? But without reviews, no one wants to rent from anybody and no one wants to rent to anyone. So they said, how can we build trust between two strangers when there's no reviews on the platform? And they actually ran this interesting study with Stanford. And what they found was prompting people to share just a little bit of demographic information about themselves, and the two people could find something in common, built a sense of trust. And for those of you, recall the last time you were on a Zoom call with somebody you didn't know, what's the first thing you do, right? You either bring up the weather or you bring up where somebody is from. Because those two key points, all of a sudden, you're usually able to connect in some capacity on those two key data points, and it builds a sense of trust, right? And this is another prime example. And this was a platform, it's a marketplace. You know, there's not a lot of reviews when you first start out. So you say, how can I build a sense of trust? If you go to your users, you're not going to get great insights. But if you go to the behavioral science, all of a sudden it opens up this brand new Pandora's box of tactics and strategies that you can use. Samsung Health, they do a lot of this with their gamification models. I'm sure anyone that's ever used Peloton has seen these messages. They're using a lot more of these social norming techniques. 9 members you follow are working out now to get you to engage in that behavior. If you really poke through Noom's onboarding, they actually dynamically change the onboarding as you move through it. So I noticed on one of the steps where they ask you to identify the gender that you identify with, and based on not only what gender you select, but also other demographic information, they change the testimonial on the next page. And I went back through this multiple times, right? So they changed, like, for example, if I put in I was 25, they would show me a person on the next page that was 25. If I put in I was 45, they would show me a person on the next page that was 45. And what they're doing is they're actually taking this concept, whether they know it or not, of that future self that I was talking about, and they're bringing it into the way that similarity bias and social norms show up, right? Because if I go through this experiment and I see, the bottom right-hand corner, a guy that kind of represents or looks like me, but he's fit, I kind of start to see myself in that person. And so, oh, if that person who is like me has been able to achieve this, that means that I probably can too. Mario Kart, I used to play Mario Kart all the time. And one of the things that you'll notice when you play Mario Kart is when you come up to the last lap, it doesn't matter how far ahead or how far behind you are, all of a sudden everyone becomes neck and neck. And this is something that's actually done intentionally in the way that games are designed. And it's something known as rubber banding. And it's this idea of dynamic game balancing. And what these games do is they rebalance the game in real time. So no one in the game ever feels too far behind or too far ahead. And this is actually one of the ways that leaderboards can backfire, because if you're too far ahead or too far behind, you start to say, hey, there's no point in trying hard anymore because I have enough distance. I'm either going to just kind of coast or I'm going to give up. And Duolingo does a very interesting job of mitigating this. Rubber banding technique is through leaderboards. So they use leaderboards, but they use it in a really interesting way. They don't have one massive leaderboard. They break you up into these subsets of leaderboards. And once you graduate from a certain league, you go into the next league, right? So in your cohort, in your subset, you always feel that you're competing. And once you've become really good, you're bumped up to another cohort where there are people that you can compete against. And this is a really interesting application of rubber banding, but in a completely different way. Okay, so now moving into how we decide and how we make decisions, given the way that information is presented. So when I do these presentations live, I usually go around the room and I ask people what the population of Milwaukee is. And one time there was somebody from Milwaukee and that person knew, but usually people have to take a guess. And I ask them to tell me out loud, not only their guess, but the rationalization behind their guess. And what I'll find is if somebody is from like New York City, for example, they might say, I think the population of New York City is around 8 million. I I or somebody else in the room will stand up and will say, I'm from Green Bay, it's about 100,000. And then they'll start to do math based on their location. So the person from New York City might say, listen, I think Milwaukee's about 2 million because I think it's about a fourth the size of New York City. Somebody from Green Bay might say, I think it's 3 times the size, it's 300,000. But the population of Milwaukee is around 600,000. But the point of this is people can arrive at two different points based solely on what their anchor points are. What number or information are they anchoring on that they know? And this has a huge impact in the way that we decide. There was an interesting study that Dan Ariely did years ago where he basically asked his students in his class to sign up for The Economist and gave them three choices. There's a web for $59, there's a print for $125, and there's a web and print for $125. He ran the experiment and he saw that nobody picked the print, right? Because why would you? The web and print is the same price, but you get more. And then 16% chose the web. But what was fascinating about this experiment is he ran it again with a completely different group of students, but this time he removed the middle option. So there was only two options present, the web and the web and print. And when he did this, look what happened to the numbers. The 84% all of a sudden dropped to 32%. So in the first instance, nobody selected the middle one. In the second instance, nobody selected the middle one because it wasn't there, but the purchasing completely shifted. And why is that? Well, the choice, which here is known as a decoy, we look at the middle one and we're using that to say, oh, the web and print is a great deal because the print is the same price, but I get less. But in the second option, what you can see is that doesn't exist. So all of a sudden, we don't view the web and print as a great deal, and the purchasing behavior completely shifts. So when you're presenting people with information, it's not only about what is present that you want them to select, but the other items on the page can have a big impact on what it is that they choose. Pricing pages, you see this a lot. I'm not going to go into great detail, but people who are very good at crafting pricing pages, you'll notice that there are usually one option that just doesn't really seem rational for the price point, but that's really important to consider. So you're walking into a grocery store. What jar of ice cream would you pick? The one that's 20% fat or the one that's 80% fat free? They both contain the same amount of content, but one is framed in a way that it feels it doesn't have as much fat content. And the way that we word decisions and present information can have a huge impact on how we decide. And not only the way that we frame decisions, but how many choices we give to people. The paradox of choice, made famous by Barry Schwartz. He did a study where in a grocery store, they offered people 15 different types of jams. And so often, how many times do we do this when we're building companies? We go out to our customers and we say, hey, these are all the different choices that you can select from, thinking that if we give them endless choices, they're going to pick at least one. The interesting piece of this is when they did this, 60% of shoppers stopped to sample, but only 3% actually bought jam. They then narrowed down the different types of jam to only 6, and you can see 40% stop, so less traffic, but the conversion rate skyrocketed. And this is a very real thing that I've seen come to light many, many times. When there's too many choices, there's this analysis paralysis. We can't really compare and contrast the different options, and we get a little bit overwhelmed and we kind of just give up. So one of the recommendations I often say is early and often is you want to slim down the choices that you're giving users. And if you can't actually slim down the choices, one of the things you can do is you can guide the choice. You can ask them questions up front to then guide them to a certain decision so it doesn't actually feel overwhelming. This other concept of the IKEA effect, which is why when you buy IKEA furniture and you spend hours putting it together and then you go to sell it, you try to sell it for a much higher price than you think it might be worth. And this is also known as the endowment effect. If we have a hand in building something, we take more ownership over it. And this is a prime example of using a behavioral science theory for implementing a strategy that runs counter to best UI and UX design principles. So onboarding processes. If you want somebody to complete your onboarding process, best practice from a UI standpoint would typically say, make it as short as possible, least number of questions possible. There are some instances where making the process longer And using the endowment effect, getting buy-in along the way can actually not only increase conversions, but also retention long term. If you've ever been through Noom's onboarding process, it's like 10 or 15 minutes long, but it leverages the endowment effect in such a way that once you're midway through it, it's really hard to exit out of it because you've already put so much effort and endowment into the experience that you feel ownership over it, that you want to continue through the actual experience. I am actually going to stop there, Justin. I do have more, but we only have 8 minutes left. So I do want to give some time for questions and answers. But if you do want more resources as it relates to this, as Justin said, I do have a book. And then the other resource I have is we launch a platform, which has all of these tactics and insights. It's called engageiq.co. There's an access code, Bionic, which you can plug in and you can sign up for the platform to poke around. It's got resources in there, some of which I went through today, but also many of which are going to be brand new.
Awesome. Yeah, and I'll send out that link and code kind of in the summary for everyone that was here. We did have a question that kind of built off of this. So I kind of saved it purposely because I knew we would get here. But what are some advanced level resources on behavioral science and product you'd recommend? I've been working in this field for 8 years. It's frustrating that most books articles are for beginners. So obviously this is a great resource, and we'd love for you to poke around here. And I've had a chance to take a peek at what Nate has here, and it is truly awesome. But Nate, are there other areas that you'd recommend?
Yeah, so it's a great question. I will say I have the same frustration as you. There is Inside BE is a great resource. Honestly, what I usually do is I go to Google Scholar and I look for academic research papers on a certain topic and find the insights in there. And then I will take those insights, and then most companies don't realize that they're doing it. Try to find an example of a product that brings that insight to life, even if it's by accident, to connect those dots. But most of the behavioral science, behavioral design resources out there are very 101. So it's hard to come by things that are much deeper. But I would say Inside BE is definitely a good resource to poke through.
Any other questions? We had a question in the chat real quick from Vicky. Nate, will you please share your slides? Great webinar.
Yes, I'm
Okay,
happy to. I'm happy to do
awesome.
that.
Thanks for asking that, Vicky.
Oh, great. Someone's already poking around Engage IQ. That's wonderful to hear. And yeah, I'm available. So you can actually book a call through the platform if you want to talk more. On LinkedIn, I'm available. Feel free to email me. I'm always happy to talk about these concepts and theories. There's a lot more here in the presentation that I didn't get to today. But I do hope, I think the biggest thing is before you go and build strategies and build features, I do recommend like look at your competitors, look at what's going on in the market, but make an effort to first understand like how that feature or how that strategy would drive that behavior that you want to drive in the right way. Because I can't tell you how many times I work with clients and companies who saw something that looked really cool, copied it and pasted it and used it in their experience, and then it just doesn't move the needle, and you waste a lot of time and a lot of money. So that's my if I had to leave you with one thing today, that's like my biggest recommendation.
Nate, we had one
Um,
other quick question.
yes. So
Um,
this
okay.
is a yeah, for long-term user engagement, can you transition users from extrinsic to intrinsic rewards? This is one of the tactics often used with this. And the short answer is yes. And I would recommend that. So if you're looking at long-term behavior, but you can't start off with intrinsic motivation, is use extrinsic motivation to start the behavior, but slowly start to sunset it as you build in the intrinsic motivation long-term. So that is a great strategy for that.
And Nate, I had a question. We talked about at the very beginning, kind of what users say and what they believe, and kind of more on the qualitative into quantitative, and then the behavioral science of it all. Um, I think a lot of folks struggle with even what are the right questions to ask in that qualitative set, and then getting the quantitative components. Like, are there resources you've seen to start that discussion to see the the differentiation between those items and then what to test for, and kind
Yeah.
of begin that experience and experimentation.
So my biggest recommendation is number one, it depends if you're doing qualitative research around just like finding new opportunities versus getting feedback on a product experience. If you're doing the first, my biggest recommendation is get somebody to walk you through a journey that happened in the past. Don't ask people what you would do in the future. Say, so for example, if you're building a product experience that helps people file their taxes, have somebody walk you through step by step the last time that they went through the process of filing their taxes. Because often what happens is when we recount an experience, there are so many more points of pain that we remember versus just telling you. So that's the first thing is recount an experience. The second thing is dig into people's problems and pain. Don't ask them for solutions. That's your job. Your job is to come up with solutions. Their job is to tell you all of their problem and all of their pain points. If you're actually looking at the product experience once it's built, best recommendation is when you're doing that type of testing is put the product experience in front of them, ask them to guide you through how they'll go through the product experience and have them narrate out loud every single thing that's going through their head. That'll give you an idea of is the product experience solving the pain in the right way? That's on the product fit side. On the market side, best recommendation I can give, especially if it's B2B, is spin up cold email campaigns and start trying to pitch and sell the product. That's going to give you the best, quickest, cheapest insight you're going to get to figure out like if you have the go-to-market strategy correct.
Awesome. No, I mean, this was a fantastic chat. I think everyone walked away a lot of great insights. I learned a lot. I had a lot of notes. I'm excited to get out the summary to the community for who couldn't join, and get this a little bit more widely available. But obviously, we loved having you. Want to have more of these chats and kind of dig into other topics. This is a great broad overview of it all. There's a lot of insights and information that we can dig into. One of the reasons I really wanted to have Nate on this chat. One, obviously, learning from him, and iron sharpens iron, but also kind of during our diligence, we realized that 1 in 10 startups actually talk to their customers, right? And I think that's a huge pain point in failure. And in trying to figure out the easiest way to do it and the most efficient ways to do it is really important, because everyone's busy. And so making sure you have the right tactics behind you and then simplifying those solutions. And that's something that I think Nate has built at Engage IQ. So I think definitely check that out. It's something that we want our community to use. Will and Tony, I see your note link to my book. I'm going to send it. We're going to send out a digital copy to everybody after this. So you'll get that by like Monday or Tuesday at the latest. Once we get the email and summary out.
And if you do want a hard copy, you can grab it on Amazon. You'll just have to pay for those because I don't have those for free. But
yeah. So if you we could drop the book here real quick. Just give me 1 second. Actually, I'll send it out in a follow up to everybody so you have the link.
Cool.
But yeah, so we appreciate everyone's time today. Everyone will get the notes and follow up from the conversation. We typically have at least one webinar a month on different topics, and we're excited to kind of bring you those conversations. We'll release the next one in email that gets sent out to everybody. And again, have a great day. Enjoy the weekend, especially the long Memorial Day weekend here. And we will all talk soon. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Justin.
All right, take care. Bye.